Kadishayim vi Kadish Asar Shabbos Amisachides Besoiru Seichu Kadishayim vi Kadish Asar Shabbos Amisachides Besoiru Seichu Pesach Lohem Lo Yam Berutzoin Liftov Yach Sharei Retzoin Leichu Pesach Lohem
To all my fellow Mitpalalim at the Beth Garden community, a good and Erev Shabbos. I hope and trust first and foremost that everyone is safe and well. As we're in extraordinary times, I thought that this week it would be appropriate to share a few thoughts that I think would be a bit unique, because I'm not there with you, but rather I'm a stranded Israeli outside of Israel, dying to get back, but unfortunately not able to yet. And I want to put it into context of an historic date that happened yesterday, one that we read about in shuls not so many months ago. Says Rav Yair Bachrach, the author of the Chavot Sha'ir, that every year on Kaf Gimel Sivan, which was yesterday, Yesh Liskor Neis Purim, you're supposed to remember the miracle of Purim. Ki bo nichtavu igarot ha'achronim hateshua. That on that day, Kaf Gimel Sivan was the day that Mordechai got the permission from Achashverosh to write the second igrot, and ultimately to give the Jews the ability to defend themselves. And therefore, the Rabot Bo Simcha. You're supposed to have an increased joy on Kaf Gimel Sivan. With the greatest respect to the miracle of Purim, how is it possible in the scheme of things, running to bomb shelters, not able to go to school, work, or whatnot, that we're supposed to the Rabot Bo Simcha? And I'd like to give two reasons why I believe we can indeed the Rabot Simcha as we get into Shabbos. Number one, I believe this week we finally rectified the Chet HaMeraglim to the second power. What did the Meraglim say? Lo nuchal la'alot la'am, they say in this week's Parsha, ki chazak hu mimenu. Because they're too strong. They instilled fear. They instilled imaginary images of great giants and whatnot. And yet this week, their great-grandchildren are actually dying to get back to Israel. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis struck abroad like me are applying in every possible way to get back, looking into boats, El Arish, Sinai, trying their best to do anything possible to get into the land, to go from bomb shelter to bomb shelter, to be in danger, but to be there. You know, it's interesting. They call the flights that they're beginning to send out Tisot Chilutz, rescuing flights. Usually a rescue flight takes you from a place of danger to a place of safety. But here, it's exactly the opposite. While the Ministry of Tourism sends me a message, keep enjoying your vacation abroad, people want to go from so-called safety to danger. I mean, just look at this video of people returning to Israel in the midst of everything we've been going through this week. So it's no longer just Kalev and Yehoshua Binun. It's hundreds of thousands screaming, Tova ha'aretz me'od, me'od. And therefore, on Kaf Gimel Sivan, as we get into Shabbos right after, I believe you can the Rabot Bo Simcha. But there's a second reason, and that is what indeed the two Meraglim that saw the light said, Hashem itanu, al tira'um. God is with us, do not be scared. You know, in our history, there were two wars that had opposites when it came to the amount of army they took. In the book of Shoftim, Gidon goes to war against the Binyanim, and God keeps on telling him, you know, release soldiers. He gets to 300, only 300, and God says, that's good enough, go to war. And yet when Yehoshua fights against Ai the second time, God says to Yehoshua, take the entire nation. Why? So if you would ask a Jew, sure they'll tell you, when all the Jewish people are learning Torah, then you only need a small army. But when all the Jewish people are not learning Torah, then you need a big army. Well, it turns out to be the opposite, because at the time of the Shoftim with Gidon, They were in a terrible spiritual state, but at the time of Yehoshua, they were in a wonderful spiritual state. So at the time when they're in a very high spiritual state, big army, and we're in a low spiritual state, small army. Explains Rav Kook. When we're in a high ethical standard, both religiously and beyond, ultimately, everyone will know there's divine providence and God is with us. And therefore, you could take a big army, win a war, quote unquote, naturally, and everyone will say, with the help of God, the Israeli army won. But in the book of Shoftim, when they fell spiritually, as baharbato ishtatlud leyakir klal yad Hashem, v'yomar ki yadi hoshia li. In that time, if you take a big army, and no one really recognizes God because they're doing averos right, left, and center, and they'll say it's because of the army we won. When you're in a high spiritual state, everyone knows God's behind you. Take the biggest army. When you're in a low spiritual state, you better take a small army. Supernatural miracles is an ICU when the Jewish people are in a terrible state. But when we naturally can fly from Israel to Iran and do what we need to do to take away this terrible threat on our lives, and we do it with an army that's strong and organized and sophisticated, then indeed the world says God must be with them. As a matter of fact, that's exactly why the Ramban in this week's Parsha says it was a good idea to send spies to the land, because Yisrael amru kederech kol habaim lehilachem be'eretz nochit sheshulchim lifnehem anashim ladat advrachim umevo ha'arim. Anytime you want to capture a foreign land, you send spies to find out how to do it. That's intelligence. Ki hakatuv lo yismoch bechol ma'asav al hanes, because you don't rely on miracles. But rather the soldiers are able to go and to do what's needed to be done militarily wise in order to capture and to do the job at hand. I believe that there's no question that in the last few months there has been a resurgence of spirituality in Israel. Since Agam Berger came back, that I spoke about in Shul, saying B'derech emunah alachti u'b'derech emunah shafti, it's just amazing how many people have a thirst for Judaism, not just on the battlefield, but even in the back of the battlefield. And indeed, it's interesting that this is one of the brachot that Moshe Rabbeinu gave on his deathbed. We read it on Simchas Torah. It's in the last aliyah of the Torah. But Moshe Rabbeinu says, Ashrecha Yisrael mikamocha. Praise you, Israel, no one's like you. And one of the brachos he says, Asher cherev ga'avatecha, that the sword is your pride. The sword is your pride? Says the Chasam Sofer. No one's going to suspect being a closet religious Zionist. If we come and it's all miracles and we're coming because God helped us, they're not going to come to Israel and say, oh, Israel's great, Israel's wonderful. But rather, they'll say, Hashem yilachem lachem, God is fighting for you. But they're weaklings. But, says the Chasam Sofer, if we come to them with planes and bombs, then they will say how amazing are the warriors of Israel. Not only is God with them, they themselves are amazing. As Ben Gurion was fond of saying in Israel, in order to be a realist, you must believe in miracles. Because the puzzle in the last few months totally came into place. And without divine providence and without the soldiers doing it, we would not get there. Number one, Russia's busy with Ukraine. They can't help their so-called allies. Number two, Hezbollah, 80% of their upper echelon has been destroyed by Israel. Number three, Hamas is severely injured, destroyed, and hopefully will be totally destroyed. But above all, Syria was captured by Israel in 2 days without one casualty, giving us the airway to get to Iran, which would not be possible because we had to refuel on the way and we couldn't do it if we're not going above Syria. Not to mention the radars and whatnot that would have shot down the planes. So indeed, I believe that we can lerabot simcha on this Shabbos simply because A, the Chet HaMeraglim has finally been rectified properly by these Israelis that are dying to get home. And number two, it's a clear sign with all the victories this week of the IDF that God is with us. Dafka, because the IDF is so successful, it shows that God is with us. As Moshe Rabbeinu said, Ashrecha Yisrael, praise you Israel, Asher Cherev Ga'avatecha, the sword happens to be your pride. And indeed this week, I wanted to say Mizmor LaToda so many times, but I remembered the words of the Tzitz Eliezer. The Tzitz Eliezer is wondering why the Gemara says in Shabbos that only a year later, the Shana Acheret, after the miracles of Hanukkah, they finally made it into a Yantiv, Kvaum, Va'asa'um Yamim Tovim B'Halel V'Hoda'ah. And he explains, Mipnei Shabba'oto Shana Od Hayu Metehem Shenaflu B'Milchama Mutalim Lifneihem. We can't for 1 minute forget that this year there are still casualties and dead that were killed and destroyed, not to mention maimed and hurt by these bombs and by the war in Gaza. V'hayu avelim alehem avelut chadasha, and we're all in a new mourning for them. V'lachen lo yachlu od likvo yemei halel v'hoda'ah. We're not there yet. But I'm pretty sure that in a few years' time we're going to look back at this time and say, we were alive then. We saw those miracles. Be'ezrat Hashem, Israel will continue to be successful to the extent that we will eradicate every Memshelet Zadol Min Haaretz, and God will indeed bestow upon us what we daven for so many times on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, what we sang so many times at our Shabbos and Yantiv tables. Simcha le'atzecha, v'sason le'irecha, and be'ezrat Hashem, we will see you tzmichat keren le'David avdecha far sooner than later. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom, wishing everyone Besorot Tovot, and most importantly, Yeshuot Nechamat.
Da da da